Welcome to the Saving History podcast, the sanctuary for castle devotees and medieval history enthusiasts. Prepare to embark on a thrilling voyage through time as we unveil enthralling history and legend. From ancient folklore to cutting-edge restoration, we've got it all covered. So grab your headphones and let's dive right in.
Today we're going to tell the story of one of the most dramatic sieges in medieval history, a siege that would change the fate of two kingdoms and revolutionize the art of warfare. In the waning years of the 12th century, along the chalky cliffs overlooking the Seine River, a dream took shape in stone and mortar. This was no ordinary fortress, but rather the culmination of Richard the Lionheart's military genius and architectural vision. Château Gaillard, whose name would come to echo through the centuries, rose from the limestone precipice like a declaration of power, carved into the very landscape of Normandy. The year was 1196, and Richard, fresh from his crusading exploits and captivity in Germany, understood with painful clarity the need to protect his Norman territories from the ever-ambitious Philip II of France. The site he chose for his masterpiece was Les Andelys, a strategic point where the Seine curved dramatically, creating a natural bottleneck that controlled both river traffic and the approach to Rouen, the capital of Normandy. Richard's involvement in the project was unprecedented for a monarch of his time. Contemporary chronicles tell us he was present regularly during construction, poring over designs, suggesting modifications, and driving his workers to almost superhuman efforts. The castle rose with astounding speed. The main works were completed in just 2 years, an achievement that led some to whisper of supernatural assistance. When Philip II mockingly asked if Richard's walls were finished yet, the Lionheart's response dripped with characteristic swagger. "I would take them with them raw as they are, were they as weak as they are imperfect." The design of Château Gaillard revolutionized military architecture. Its most innovative feature was the concatenated defense system, 3 separate defensive zones, each requiring individual siege efforts to overcome. The outer bailey, with its advanced design, featured an unusual 11-sided wall, studded with rotating counterweight trebuchets. The middle bailey introduced a revolutionary design element. Richard abandoned the traditional square towers in favor of curved surfaces that would better deflect projectiles, an innovation that would influence castle design for generations. But it was the inner bailey that truly showcased Richard's genius. The keep, rather than being a traditional square donjon, was shaped like a flower blooming in stone, with curved buttresses that created dead angles for attackers and maximized defensive capabilities. The walls were an impressive 8 feet thick, and the limestone blocks were cut with such precision that even today one can barely slip a knife blade between them. The cost was staggering, estimated at between £15,000 to £20,000, a sum that would equate to tens of millions in modern currency. When questioned about this enormous expenditure, Richard reportedly declared, "I would hold it were its walls made of butter." Such was his confidence in his creation. Upon its completion, he proudly proclaimed, "How beautiful she is, my 1-year-old daughter!" A rare moment of paternal tenderness from the warrior king, directed not at a child of flesh and blood, but at his masterpiece of stone and engineering. The castle's position was chosen with the eye of a master strategist. It stood upon Chateau Rock, a prominent spur of white limestone that rose 300 feet above the Seine River. This elevation wasn't merely for show. It allowed the garrison to spot approaching forces from miles away and control movement along both the river and the vital road between Paris and Rouen. The steep cliff face on one side provided natural defense, while the other approaches were protected by an elaborate system of dry moats and earthworks. The very name Gaillard spoke to its character, meaning saucy or bold in Norman French. It reflected both the castle's commanding presence and Richard's own audacious personality. Local labourers called it the Castle of the Rock, but for Richard it was always Château Gaillard, his bold statement in stone, his challenge to any who would dare threaten his Norman domains. Yet even as the mortar dried on Richard's masterpiece, the political winds were shifting. The Anglo-French rivalry, temporarily subdued during the Third Crusade, was rekindling. Philip II, watching from Paris, understood all too well the threat this new fortress posed to his ambitions in Normandy. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would test whether Richard's perfect castle could live up to its creator's boundless confidence. As the 12th century drew to a close, Château Gaillard stood proud and seemingly impregnable, its white walls gleaming above the Seine, its innovative designs the talk of Europe. None could have predicted that within a mere 6 years this masterpiece of military architecture would face its greatest test, a siege that would become legendary and whose outcome would reshape the political landscape of medieval Europe. The year 1199 brought a sudden and violent change to the political landscape of medieval Europe. On a spring evening in the Limousin region of France, Richard the Lionheart, that great warrior king who had built the mighty Château Gaillard, lay dying from a crossbow bolt wound received at the siege of Chalus. His death would set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately test his perfect castle in ways he could never have imagined. Into the power vacuum stepped Richard's younger brother John, a man whose reputation would be forever tarnished by historians. The contrast between the brothers could not have been starker. Where Richard had been a warrior's warrior, celebrated for his martial prowess and strategic mind, the Norman barons, proud and independent, looked upon their new ruler with barely concealed disdain. Philip II of France, known to history as Philip Augustus, had been waiting for just such an opportunity. A master of political manipulation, Philip had spent years building his kingdom's strength while Richard was away on crusade or busy with his continental possessions. Now, with John's accession, Philip saw his chance to realize a long-held dream, the reintegration of Normandy into the French crown lands. The political chess game began almost immediately. Philip backed the claim of Arthur of Brittany, John's young nephew, to the continental lands of the Angevin Empire. This was more than mere opportunism, it was a calculated move to destabilize John's authority among his continental vassals. The French king understood well that many Norman nobles would prefer a young, malleable ruler to John, whose reputation for arbitrary justice preceded him. The situation grew more complex when Arthur, just 16 years old, vanished while in John's custody in 1203. The young prince's disappearance sent shockwaves through medieval Europe. Rumours spread of murder, with John himself implicated in increasingly lurid tales. Philip seized upon this tragedy with political mastery before the French royal court, a clear violation of John's rights as a sovereign ruler. John's refusal to appear gave Philip the pretext he needed. Declaring John's continental fiefs forfeit for failure to fulfill his feudal obligations, Philip launched a massive military campaign into Normandy. The French king had prepared meticulously for this moment, assembling an army that contemporary chronicles described as numerous beyond count, supported by the most advanced siege equipment of the age. The Norman campaign began with a series of swift victories for Philip. Several key Norman barons, sensing which way the political winds were blowing, switched their allegiance to the French crown. Towns and lesser castles fell in quick succession. But looming above the Seine, Château Gaillard remained the key to the entire duchy. Philip knew that as long as Richard's masterpiece stood defiant, his control of Normandy would remain incomplete. Inside Château Gaillard, preparations for the inevitable siege were already underway. John had appointed Roger de Lacy as castellan, a choice that would prove crucial in the coming months. De Lacy was a veteran commander with a reputation for both tactical skill and unwavering loyalty. Under his direction, the garrison was strengthened, provisions were stockpiled, and the revolutionary defences that Richard had designed were made ready for their greatest test. The summer of 1203 saw increasing skirmishes around Les Andelys as Philip's forces probed the castle's defences. The French king himself supervised the construction of siege works and the positioning of his feared siege engines. Meanwhile, in England, John struggled to raise both men and money to support his Norman vassals. His efforts to send relief would prove too little, too late. By late August, the stage was set for one of the most dramatic sieges in medieval history. Philip's army had fully invested the castle, cutting off both river and land approaches. Within the triple walls of Château Gaillard, Roger de Lacy and his garrison of loyal knights and sergeants prepared for a siege that would test not only Richard's revolutionary military architecture, but also the limits of human endurance. As autumn approached, tension mounted on both sides. Philip knew that taking the castle quickly was essential. A prolonged siege would drain his resources and risk intervention from John. De Lacy, for his part, needed only to hold out long enough for relief to arrive from England. Neither commander could have known that they were about to engage in a siege that would be studied and written about for centuries to come. As September 1203 dawned, the field surrounding Château Gaillard transformed into a city of siege. Philip Augustus's army, estimated by contemporary chronicles at over 6,000 men, had established a formidable presence. The landscape that Richard the Lionheart had chosen for its defensive advantages now swarmed with French soldiers, siege engineers, and labourers. The air rang with the sound of hammers and saws as siege engines took shape under the watchful eyes of Philip's master engineers. Roger de Lacy, surveying the scene from the castle's highest tower, could take some comfort in his position. His garrison, though numbering only 400 men, at arms and knights, was well provisioned and protected by what many considered the finest military architecture in Christendom. The castle's 3 concentric rings of defence meant that Philip would need to conduct essentially 3 separate sieges to reach the inner keep. Moreover, the castle's position on its limestone spur made traditional mining operations nearly impossible along most of its perimeter. Philip's initial strategy revealed his military acumen. Rather than launching an immediate all-out assault, he first moved to secure his own position. His engineers constructed 2 enormous siege castles, magnificent wooden structures that would both protect his men and provide elevated platforms for his siege engines. Contemporary accounts describe these structures as reaching to the very heights of the castle walls themselves, a testament to medieval engineering capabilities. The French king also took control of the river, establishing a flotilla of boats that effectively cut off any hope of river-borne supplies or reinforcement reaching the garrison. This naval blockade would prove crucial in the months to come. To complete the investment, Philip ordered the construction of a double line of circumvallation, earthen ramparts and ditches that surrounded both the castle and his own forces, protecting them from any relief army that John might send. The first major assault came in early October. Philip's siege engines, including trebuchets, mangonels, and the feared Petraria Magna, great stone thrower, began a systematic bombardment of the outer bailey. The air filled with the whoosh and crack of flying stones, some weighing up to 200 pounds. De Lacy's men responded with their own artillery, and for several days the sky was crisscrossed with flying projectiles. The outer bailey, however, proved remarkably resilient. Richard's innovative design, with its curved walls and reinforced towers, deflected or absorbed much of the bombardment's force. When French sappers attempted to approach the walls under the cover of wooden protective structures called cats, the defenders unleashed a devastating combination of crossbow bolts, stones, and boiling oil. One contemporary chronicler described the scene as a rain of death falling from the heights. By late October, Philip changed tactics. Having failed to breach the outer walls through conventional means, he ordered his engineers to begin filling the dry moat that protected the outer bailey's northern approach. This was painstaking work, carried out under constant fire from the castle's defenders. The French soldiers used everything at hand, earth, stones, even the bodies of fallen horses, to slowly raise the level of the moat. De Lacy watched these preparations with growing concern. While his outer defences were holding, each day brought the French forces closer. His messages to King John, smuggled out by loyal servants, grew increasingly urgent. The English king's response, when it came, was troubling. Despite promises of relief, John's efforts to raise an army were meeting with little success. A significant breakthrough for Philip came in early November. His sappers, working under the cover of darkness and protected by heavy wooden shields, managed to undermine a section of the outer bailey's wall. The collapse was sudden and dramatic. An entire section of wall crumbled, creating a breach wide enough for several men to pass through abreast. The French troops rushed forward, expecting to pour through the gap, only to find that de Lacy's men had already constructed a hasty but effective wooden palisade behind the breach. This pattern of attack and counter-attack continued throughout November, with neither side gaining a decisive advantage. Philip's army suffered significant casualties in several failed assaults, while inside the castle, de Lacy's garrison, though still intact, began to feel the strain of constant vigilance. The defenders were forced to maintain a watch at all hours, never knowing when the next French attack might come. As winter approached, many of Philip's advisers urged him to suspend the siege until spring, following the conventional military wisdom of the time. Siege operations in winter were virtually unheard of, as cold, rain and mud made both supply and assault incredibly difficult. But Philip, in a decision that would prove revolutionary in medieval warfare, decided to maintain the siege through the winter months. This unprecedented choice would transform what might have been a conventional siege into one of the most remarkable military engagements of the medieval era. The winter of 1203 descended upon the Seine valley with unprecedented ferocity. Snow blanketed the siege works around Château Gaillard, and bitter winds howled through the wooden structures of Philip's siege castles. Yet the French king's determination to maintain the siege through these harsh months would prove to be a masterstroke of military innovation, one that would change the nature of medieval warfare forever. The decision to continue siege operations through winter was revolutionary. Contemporary chronicles express amazement at Philip's choice, with one monk writing, "Never before has a king of France made war in the season of frost and snow." The conventional wisdom held that winter sieges were impossible. The cold made siege engines brittle and unreliable, while mud and snow rendered supply lines treacherous. Yet Philip had prepared meticulously for this unprecedented campaign. His engineers had constructed heated shelters for the siege engines, using a system of braziers and cloth coverings to prevent the wooden components from becoming too brittle in the cold. The siege camps were transformed into semi-permanent settlements, with solid wooden buildings replacing tents. Most importantly, Philip had established a sophisticated supply network, with regular convoys bringing food and materials from Paris and other royal strongholds. For the defenders, winter brought its own set of challenges. The garrison of Château Gaillard found themselves dealing not only with the enemy below, but also with the bitter cold that penetrated even the thick stone walls of Richard's fortress. The need to maintain constant vigilance meant men had to stand watch on the walls in all weather, leading to cases of frostbite and illness among the defenders. It was during this harsh winter that one of the siege's most dramatic episodes unfolded. A group of local civilians, caught between the French lines and the castle when the siege began, had been initially admitted into the outer bailey by Roger de Lacy out of Christian charity. As winter wore on and supplies began to dwindle, de Lacy made the difficult decision to expel these civilians, knowing they would likely not survive the winter. The scene that followed would be recorded by chroniclers as one of the siege's most tragic moments. As the civilians attempted to descend the slope between the French lines and the castle, they found themselves trapped in no man's land. Philip's forces, under strict orders, refused to let them through. De Lacy, knowing the castle's supplies were limited, could not readmit them. For several days, the unfortunate civilians were caught in the middle, slowly succumbing to cold and hunger. Yet it was during these dark winter months that Philip's forces made their most significant breakthrough. A sharp-owned French soldier noticed that on the precipitous cliff face considered too steep for attack, there was a small postern gate leading to a chapel in the outer bailey. This gate, used by castle residents to access a path down to the river, was believed secure due to the cliff's steepness. On a moonless night in February 1204, a hand-picked group of French soldiers, led by a knight named Ralph of Esneval, attempted what seemed impossible. Using ropes and scaling tools, they began climbing the frozen cliff face. The bitter cold that had made life so miserable actually aided their effort. The frozen ground provided better handholds than the usual crumbling chalk. The small team reached the postern gate undetected. In a stroke of luck that would prove decisive, they found the chapel window above the gate poorly defended, as the garrison had considered this approach impregnable. The French soldiers managed to break through and establish a foothold in the chapel before the alarm was raised. What followed was some of the most desperate fighting of the siege. De Lacy's men, realizing the danger, launched an immediate counterattack to try to dislodge the French from their position. The battle for the chapel raged through the night, with reinforcements from both sides pouring into the confined space. The French soldiers, fighting with the knowledge that retreat down the cliff face was impossible, managed to hold their position. By dawn, Philip had managed to rush enough men through this unexpected entry point to secure a significant foothold in the outer bailey. This breakthrough was achieved not through superior technology or overwhelming force, but through the kind of innovative thinking that winter warfare demanded. The frozen cliff face, seen as an impassable barrier, had become an unexpected avenue of attack. The success of the chapel assault marked a turning point in the siege. While the castle's inner defences remained intact, the loss of complete control over the outer bailey meant that Richard's concept of defence in depth was beginning to unravel. As winter began to give way to spring, both attackers and defenders knew that the next phase of the siege would be decisive. Spring arrived at Château Gaillard, bringing not relief but a new intensity to the siege. With the French firmly established in the outer bailey, Philip Augustus turned his full attention to the middle ward, where Richard the Lionheart's innovative military architecture would face its greatest test. The middle bailey, with its revolutionary curved walls and deep rock-cut ditch, had been designed specifically to resist the very siege techniques Philip was about to employ. The French king's siege engineers began their most ambitious project yet, the construction of a massive mining gallery aimed at the middle bailey's eastern wall. This was no simple tunnel, but rather a sophisticated piece of engineering. The gallery had to be carefully supported with wooden props, ventilated to allow the miners to breathe, and protected from both the defenders above and the possibility of collapse. Roger de Lacy's men could hear the French miners working beneath them, the sound of their picks carrying through the limestone rock. The defenders attempted counter-mining, digging their own tunnels to intercept the French works, but the castle's design worked against them. The very rock foundations that made Château Gaillard so strong also made it extremely difficult to dig effective countermines from within the walls. Philip's engineers employed a technique that was cutting-edge for its time. They dug not one, but multiple galleries, creating a honeycomb of tunnels beneath the eastern wall. As they worked, they supported the weight of the wall above with wooden props. These props were then wrapped in fresh animal hides, a detail recorded by the chronicler Roger of Howden. When all was ready, the hides were soaked with water, causing them to shrink and pull away from the stone above. The collapse, when it came, was catastrophic. A section of the middle bailey's eastern wall, nearly 40 feet in length, crashed down into the French mining works. The noise was said to have been heard as far away as Vernon, some 6 miles distant. De Lacy's men rushed to plug the breach with a hasty barricade of timber and rubble, but they now faced a crisis. The fall of the wall had created not just a physical gap in their defences, but a psychological one as well. Philip wasted no time in exploiting this advantage. His troops launched a series of relentless assaults against the breach, while siege engines pounded the remaining sections of wall to prevent defenders from concentrating their forces. The French king had also received reinforcements and fresh supplies, allowing him to maintain constant pressure on the beleaguered garrison. It was during this phase that Philip introduced another innovative weapon, Greek fire, obtained at great expense from Byzantine traders. This terrifying substance, which could not be extinguished with water, was launched against the wooden defences the garrison had erected behind the breach. Contemporary accounts describe the horror of defenders trying to combat these flames, which seemed to cling to wood and stone alike with demonic persistence. De Lacy's defensive strategy grew increasingly desperate. With his forces stretched thin, he began stripping metal from the castle's roofs to create makeshift projectiles. The garrison's crossbowmen, positioned in the remaining towers, maintained a constant fire on the French positions, but their numbers were dwindling. Each defender lost to French arrows or mining accidents was irreplaceable, while Philip could continue to rotate fresh troops into the assault. The battle for the Middle Bailey became a brutal war of attrition. The French would attack in waves, each assault wearing down the defenders a little more. De Lacy organized his remaining forces into small, mobile units that could rush to reinforce any threatened point, but this meant his men were constantly in motion, growing more exhausted with each passing day. The decisive moment came when a second mining operation, this time targeting the northwestern tower of the Middle Bailey, succeeded in bringing down another section of wall. With breaches now on two sides, the Middle Bailey became untenable. De Lacy made the difficult decision to withdraw his remaining forces into the inner keep, abandoning the Middle Bailey to the French. The loss of the Middle Bailey was a severe blow to the defenders' morale. Richard's revolutionary design had been predicated on the principle of defence in depth, with each bailey buying time for relief forces to arrive. But no relief was coming. King John, distracted by political troubles in England and facing baronial opposition to raising new taxes for the war effort, had effectively abandoned Château Gaillard to its fate. As Philip's forces secured their position in the Middle Bailey and began preparing for the final assault on the inner keep, both attackers and defenders knew they were witnessing a turning point in military history. The sophisticated mining operations and innovative siege techniques employed by Philip had proven that even the most advanced military architecture of the age could be overcome by equally advanced engineering. By early March 1204, Roger de Lacy and his remaining men found themselves confined to Château Gaillard's inner keep, Richard the Lionheart's masterpiece of military architecture. The massive octagonal tower, with its 8-foot-thick walls and innovative buttress design, represented their last hope of survival. What had begun as a garrison of 400 had been reduced to barely 100 effective fighters, each man exhausted by months of constant combat and dwindling provisions. The inner keep of Château Gaillard was the epitome of Richard's military genius. Its unique design featured curved walls that were virtually impossible to mine and arrow slits arranged in a revolutionary triple-tier system that allowed defenders to maintain overwhelming fields of fire on any approaching enemy. Under normal circumstances, this formidable structure might have held out indefinitely, but circumstances were far from normal. Philip Augustus, sensing victory within his grasp, now concentrated every siege engine in his arsenal against the keep. The bombardment was relentless. Massive stones, some weighing over 200 pounds, crashed against the walls day and night. Contemporary chronicles describe the noise as like continuous thunder, shaking the very foundations of the earth. The French king's strategy was clear. He intended to either breach the keep's walls or break the spirits of its defenders. Inside the keep, conditions deteriorated rapidly. The withdrawal from the Middle Bailey had been so sudden that the defenders had been unable to bring all their supplies with them. Water was strictly rationed, and food supplies dwindled to the point where the garrison was reduced to eating their horses. The constant bombardment made sleep nearly impossible, and the men took turns manning the walls in 4-hour shifts that left them exhausted and increasingly prone to mistakes. De Lacy maintained strict discipline despite these hardships. He organized his remaining forces with tactical precision, positioning his best crossbowmen at the crucial arrow slits and keeping a mobile reserve ready to reinforce any threatened point. The Castellan himself seemed to be everywhere at once, encouraging his men, organizing the defense, and personally participating in the fighting when French assault parties managed to reach the walls. The breaking point came not from a breach in the walls, but from an unexpected quarter. A French mining team, working with unprecedented skill and determination, managed to locate the keep's latrine chute, a weakness in any medieval castle's defences. This vertical shaft, necessarily built into the thickness of the wall, provided a potential route into the heart of the keep. On the night of March 6th, a hand-picked team of French soldiers attempted what seemed impossible. Led by a knight named Peter of Boghis, they began climbing the latrine chute, using ropes and scaling tools. The shaft was narrow and foul, but it was undefended, and the garrison had considered such an approach inconceivable. The climbing party managed to reach the chapel level of the keep undetected. The first alarm was raised when a servant going to empty a waste bucket encountered the lead French soldiers emerging from the shaft. In the confused fighting that followed, the French managed to secure the chapel and begin hauling up reinforcements through the same route. De Lacy, awakened by the commotion, led a desperate counter-attack to contain the breach, but it was too late. As dawn broke on March 7th, 1204, French forces had established a solid foothold within the keep itself. The fighting that followed was desperate and close quarters, with every room and stairwell becoming a battlefield. De Lacy's men fought with the courage of desperation, but they were overwhelmed by fresh French troops. By midday it was clear that further resistance was futile. Roger de Lacy, acknowledging the inevitable, requested terms of surrender from Philip. The French king, impressed by the garrison's valour and perhaps mindful of the political advantages of magnanimity, granted generous terms. The surviving defenders would be allowed to leave with their weapons and personal possessions, an unusual concession that recognized their extraordinary defence. The surrender ceremony was conducted with all the formality that medieval warfare demanded. De Lacy presented his sword to Philip Augustus personally, and contemporary accounts suggest that the French king received it with marked respect, even praising the castellan's leadership and determination. The surviving members of the garrison, now reduced to just 36 knights and 80 sergeants, marched out of the castle they had defended for more than 6 months. As the last defenders left Château Gaillard, they passed beneath the same walls that Richard the Lionheart had once proudly called his beautiful 1-year-old daughter. The castle had proven both the genius of Richard's design and its ultimate limitations. No fortress, no matter how well designed, could withstand a determined siege without the hope of relief. The fall of Château Gaillard reverberated through medieval Europe like the echo of Philip's siege engines. The capture of Richard the Lionheart's supposedly impregnable fortress marked not just the end of a remarkable siege, but the beginning of a new era in military architecture and warfare. The repercussions would reshape both the political landscape of medieval Europe and the very nature of castle design for centuries to come. The immediate political consequences were swift and devastating for the English crown. With Château Gaillard fallen, the rest of Normandy quickly followed. Rouen, the ducal capital, surrendered to Philip on June 24, 1204, after a brief siege. By the end of the year, virtually all of England's continental territories north of the Loire had fallen into French hands. The loss of Normandy, held by English kings since William the Conqueror, marked the effective end of the Anglo-Norman realm that had existed since 1066. For King John, the loss of Château Gaillard became a symbol of his failures as a ruler. Contemporary chroniclers were scathing in their criticism of his inability to relieve the siege. William of Wendover wrote that John remained soft as wax while his greatest fortress fell. The loss contributed significantly to the growing baronial dissatisfaction that would ultimately lead to Magna Carta in 1215. The soft king, who could not hold his father's and brother's territories, would find his own authority increasingly challenged. Philip Augustus, conversely, emerged from the siege with his reputation greatly enhanced. His innovative approach to winter siege warfare and the sophisticated engineering operations employed at Château Gaillard demonstrated that he was every bit as capable a military commander as his Plantagenet rivals. The victory marked a crucial step in the expansion of royal authority in medieval France, establishing the Capetian dynasty as the dominant power in Western Europe. The siege's impact on military architecture was equally profound. Richard's innovations in castle design, the concentric defences, the curved walls, the sophisticated arrow-slit arrangements, had all proven insufficient against determined siege warfare, backed by adequate resources and innovative thinking. future castle builders would draw important lessons from both the strengths and weaknesses revealed during the siege. The successful mining operations against the Middle Bailey led to increased emphasis on foundation design in subsequent castles. Engineers began incorporating listening galleries, tunnel systems built into castle foundations that allowed defenders to detect and counter mining attempts. The vulnerability of the latrine chute that had proved crucial in the final assault led to redesigns of these necessary features, with offset or dogleg arrangements becoming common. Yet perhaps the most significant architectural lesson was that no single castle, no matter how well designed, could be truly impregnable. The future of military architecture would lie not in building bigger and stronger individual fortresses, but in creating networks of mutually supporting castles that could control territories through their combined strength. Philip Augustus himself would demonstrate this principle in the decades following his victory, constructing a sophisticated network of royal castles across his expanded domains. The human cost of the siege also left its mark on medieval military thinking. The tragic fate of the civilians expelled during the winter siege led to increased consideration of non-combatant populations in military planning. Future castle designs often incorporated specific provisions for civilian shelter during sieges, and military commanders became more conscious of their responsibilities toward civilian populations. The innovative tactics employed during the siege, particularly Philip's decision to continue operations through winter, influenced military thinking for generations. The sophisticated use of mining, the coordination of siege engines, and the exploitation of architectural weaknesses all became standard elements of siege warfare. The detailed contemporary accounts of the siege were studied by military commanders and engineers well into the Renaissance period. Today, the ruins of Château Gaillard still stand proud above the Seine, a testament to both Richard's ambition and Philip's determination. The castle's massive walls, though broken, continue to impress visitors with their scale and sophistication. Archaeological studies have revealed additional details about the siege, including evidence of the mining operations and the desperate repairs attempted by the defenders. Yet perhaps the most enduring legacy of the siege lies in its demonstration of a timeless military truth, that human ingenuity and determination can overcome any static defense. Richard the Lionheart's perfect castle had fallen not because of any fundamental flaw in its design, but because it faced an enemy who was willing to innovate, adapt, and persevere. The siege of Château Gaillard remains a testament to both the heights of medieval military architecture and the limitations of even the most sophisticated defensive systems. Perhaps the most poignant lesson of Château Gaillard is that human ingenuity will always find a way to overcome any obstacle, no matter how insurmountable it may seem. Philip's victory wasn't just about superior numbers or resources, it was about adaptation, innovation, and the willingness to try what had never been done before. Thank you for joining us on this journey through one of medieval history's most pivotal moments. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep saving history.
And thus concludes another chapter in our ongoing exploration of medieval history. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time. If you've enjoyed today's episode and want to delve deeper into the fascinating world of the Middle Ages, I invite you to join our community on Patreon. Find the link in our description or search for the Saving History channel on Patreon. Our subscribers get access to exclusive bonus episodes, early releases, and a wealth of additional medieval content. Don't forget to subscribe to Saving History on your favorite podcast platform to ensure you never miss an episode. Remember, in understanding our past, we gain insight into our present. Until our next historical adventure, this is your host, Hunter, encouraging you to keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep saving history.